The rope whistled through the air and caught the runaway stallion by the neck before it could clear the fence. And Martha Hayes pulled back hard, her boots digging into the Colorado dirt as the animal reared and fought against her hold. "Easy now," she called out, her voice steady despite the burning in her shoulders. The horse was wild-eyed and furious, but Martha had been doing this since she was 12 years old, and at 22 she knew how to read an animal's fear. She let the rope slacken just enough to give the stallion room to think, then tightened it again when he tried to bolt. 3 more minutes of this dance and the horse finally settled, sides heaving, nostrils flared but no longer fighting. "Well, I'll be damned," said a voice from behind her. Martha turned to see a tall cowboy leaning against the fence post, hat pushed back on his head, watching her with an expression somewhere between surprise and admiration. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same mountains that surrounded them, all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin, with eyes the color of a summer sky. That was some roping. Martha coiled her rope and tried to ignore the way her heart had suddenly decided to beat faster. "Just doing what needs doing," she said, leading the now docile stallion toward the corral. "This one's been causing trouble for 3 days." The cowboy pushed off from the fence and walked over, moving with the easy confidence of a man who spent more time on horseback than on his own 2 feet. "Name's James Cordell," he said, extending a hand. "Just hired on with your father's outfit." She shook his hand, noting the calluses that matched her own. "Martha Hayes, and if you are working for my father, you should know that stallion you are about to pet will take your fingers off." James pulled his hand back just as the horse's teeth snapped at the empty air. He laughed, a deep sound that made something warm unfurl in Martha's chest. "Noted. Your father mentioned he had a daughter, but he didn't mention she was the best hand on the ranch." "He wouldn't," Martha said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Pa thinks I should be in the house learning to cook and clean like my sisters." "Can you?" "Can I what?" "Cook and clean." Martha tied off the stallion and turned to face James fully. "I can burn water, and I once tried to sew a dress that ended up looking like a feed sack with arm holes. I can't dance worth a damn either. Can't do anything ladies are supposed to do." She said it defiantly, waiting for the judgment that usually followed such an admission, but James just smiled, slow and genuine, and tipped his hat back further. "But you can rope." Those 4 words, simple as they were, hit Martha like a lightning strike. She had spent her entire life being told what she could not do, what she should not do, what proper young women did not do. And here was this stranger, this cowboy with kind eyes and a smile that made her stomach flip, seeing her for exactly what she was and finding it worthy of praise. "Yeah," she said softly, feeling her cheeks warm. "I can rope." The summer of 1885 in the Colorado Territory was shaping up to be one of the hottest on record, and the Hayes Ranch was feeling the strain. Cattle needed constant watering, fences needed mending, and there was always something trying to go wrong. Martha's father, Robert Hayes, ran a tight operation with 15 hands, but he was getting older and the work was getting harder. He had 3 daughters, Margaret, Sarah, and Martha, and 2 sons, both younger. Margaret and Sarah had married off already, moving to Denver and Pueblo respectively, leaving Martha as the only daughter still at home. Martha had always been different from her sisters. While they played with dolls, she was out in the barn learning to throw a lasso. While they practiced their needlework, she was riding the range with the ranch hands, learning to spot sick cattle and mend broken fences. Her mother had died when Martha was 10, and without that gentle hand to guide her toward proper femininity, Martha had run wild under the Colorado sun. Her father had tried in his gruff way to rein her in. He hired tutors to teach her music and deportment. He bought her fancy dresses from catalogs and insisted she attend church socials. But Martha was stubborn as a mule, and every attempt to make her into a proper lady ended in disaster. She fell asleep during piano lessons. She ripped her dresses climbing trees. She spent church socials hiding in the stables, talking to the horses. Now, at 22, Robert Hayes had mostly given up. He let Martha work the ranch alongside his men, though he grumbled about it constantly. He still held out hope that she might catch some cowboy's eye and settle down, but most of the men who worked for him treated Martha like one of the boys, not a potential bride. James Cordell was different, though. Martha noticed it in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. She noticed it in the way he always seemed to be nearby when she was working, offering help that wasn't condescending but genuinely collaborative. She noticed it in the way he talked to her, like her opinions on cattle and horses and ranch management actually mattered. 3 weeks after James arrived, they were out mending fence on the northern boundary when a summer storm rolled in fast, the way they did in the mountains. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black as midnight and pouring rain like the heavens had cracked open. "Cabin!" James shouted over the thunder, pointing to a small line shack barely visible through the rain. They ran for it, leading their horses, and burst through the door just as lightning split the sky so close Martha could smell the ozone. Inside, the cabin was dusty but dry, with a small wood stove and a couple of bunks. James set about getting a fire started while Martha tended to the horses, rubbing them down with old sacks she found in a corner. By the time the fire was crackling, they were both soaked through and shivering. "Should pass in an hour or so," James said, holding his hands out to the fire. "These mountain storms are fierce but quick." Martha wrung water from her braid and tried not to notice how James's wet shirt clung to his shoulders. "At least we got half the fence done. More than half." "You work faster than any 2 men I have ever known." "Had to," Martha said, sitting on the floor near the fire. "Only way Pa would let me keep working was if I proved I could do twice as much as anyone else." James sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "That doesn't seem fair." "It isn't, but nothing about being a woman who doesn't want to wear fancy dresses and pour tea is fair." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "My sisters think I am crazy. They got married, got their own homes, got to stop answering to Pa. But I can't imagine marrying some man and spending my days cooking his meals and mending his socks. I would rather die." "Not all marriages are like that," James said quietly. "My parents, they worked together. Pa ran cattle, Ma kept the books and made half the decisions. They were partners. Died in a fire 5 years back. Ranch burned to the ground. I have been working other people's spreads ever since, saving up to start again." Martha looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the grief that still lingered in his eyes. "I am sorry, that must have been awful," it was, "but it taught me something. Life is too short to waste it being something you are not. If you don't want to dance or so, why should you? If you want to rope cattle and mend fences, that is just as valuable." He turned to face her fully. "More valuable to my mind. I can't eat a doily, but I can sure appreciate a well-built fence." Martha laughed despite herself. "That is the worst compliment I have ever received." "I am not good with words," James admitted, but he was smiling. "But I am good at seeing what is real, and what I see is a woman who knows her own mind and isn't afraid of hard work. That is rare. That is worth something." The air in the cabin suddenly felt charged with more than just the electricity from the storm outside. Martha's breath caught as James reached out and gently tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered there, warm against her cold skin. "Martha," he said, his voice rough. "I know I have only been here a few weeks, but I need you to know that I have never met anyone like you, and I would very much like to court you proper if you would allow it." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I don't know how to be courted proper. I would mess it up." "Then we will mess it up together." He was still so close, his eyes searching hers. "I don't want proper, I want real, I want you." When Martha kissed him, it was her first kiss ever, and it was nothing like the romance novels her sisters used to giggle over. It was awkward and desperate and perfect, with the rain hammering on the roof and the fire crackling beside them. James's hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their roughness, and Martha felt something inside her chest crack wide open, flooding her with a feeling so intense it almost scared her. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and James rested his forehead against hers. "Was that all right?" he asked. "Yes," Martha whispered. "Yes, it was more than all right." They sat there by the fire until the storm passed, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. James told her about growing up in Wyoming, about learning to break horses from his father, about his dreams of having his own spread someday. Martha told him about her mother, about feeling like she had never quite fit anywhere, about the freedom she felt when she was out on the range with just her horse and the endless sky. By the time they rode back to the ranch house, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and Martha knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever. Courting while living on the same ranch and working together every day was both easier and harder than Martha had imagined. Easier because they saw each other constantly, sharing meals in the bunkhouse and working side by side on the range. Harder because every time James smiled at her, she wanted to kiss him again, and they had to be careful. Her father would not take kindly to one of his hands dallying with his daughter, courting or not, but James was nothing if not patient. He courted her in small ways, bringing her wildflowers he picked on the range, saving the best pieces of beef at dinner for her plate, staying up late to help her with the bookwork she hated. He never tried to change her or make her into something she wasn't. When the other hands teased her for rope burns on her palms, James showed his own, just as raw, and said nothing needed fixing. Martha found herself falling deeper with each passing day. She loved the way James laughed, throwing his whole body into it. She loved how he was gentle with the horses but firm when they needed it. She loved that he listened when she talked, really listened, and asked questions that showed he valued her opinions. She loved how he made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. 2 months into their courtship, Martha's father called her into his study. She went with her stomach in knots, certain someone had told him about her and James, but Robert Hayes just looked tired as he gestured for her to sit. "I am getting old, Martha," he said without preamble. "I need to think about what happens to this ranch when I am gone." "Pa, you are fine," Martha protested, but he held up a hand. "I am 63 years old and my back hurts every morning. I am not dying tomorrow, but I am not getting any younger either." He leaned back in his chair. "Your brothers are too young to run this place, and your sisters are settled with their own families. That leaves you." Martha's heart started to pound. "What are you saying?" "I am saying this ranch should be yours. You love it more than anyone, you work it harder than anyone, and you know every inch of this land. But I can't leave it to you, not legally, not unless you are married." There it was, the catch she had been waiting for. "So you want me to marry someone so you can leave the ranch to him, you mean?" "No," her father said firmly. "I want you to marry someone you trust, someone who will let you run things the way you see fit. The ranch will be in his name on paper, but you and I both know who would really be in charge." He looked at her shrewdly. "That Cordell boy seems decent enough." Martha felt her face flame red. "You know, I am old, not blind. I have seen the way you two look at each other. He treats you with respect, works hard, knows his way around cattle. Could do worse." Robert Hayes stood up, moving to the window to look out at his land. "Could do a lot worse than a man who sees you for who you are and doesn't try to change it." "I don't want to marry just so you can leave me the ranch," Martha said. "That is not fair to James. Then marry him because you love him, but think about what I have said." Her father turned back to her. "This land should stay in the family. Your family, any children you have should inherit it, but the law being what it is, that can only happen if you are married." Martha left the study with her head spinning. She did love James, she was sure of that. But marriage was a huge step, and they had only been courting for 2 months. What if she was not ready? What if he was not ready? What if marriage changed things between them? She found James in the barn, brushing down his horse after a long day. He looked up when she entered, and his smile faded when he saw her expression. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, setting down the brush. Martha told him everything her father had said, the words tumbling out in a rush. When she finished, James was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want?" He finally asked. "What do you mean? Your father wants you to have the ranch, but that is what he wants. What do you want, Martha?" No one had ever asked her that question quite so directly. Martha thought about it, really thought about it. "I want this ranch. I want to wake up every morning and know that I am working land that is mine, that I am building something that will last. But I also want you. I want to fall asleep next to you every night and wake up next to you every morning. I want to work beside you and argue with you and kiss you whenever I feel like it." She took a shaky breath. "But I do not want you to feel trapped. I do not want you to marry me just because my father is dangling a ranch in front of you." James crossed the distance between them and took her hands in his. "Martha Hayes, I was going to ask you to marry me anyway. Maybe not today, maybe not even this month, but soon. I love you. I love your stubbornness and your skill with a rope and the way you get dirt on your face and do not even care. I love how you are not afraid of anything and how you make me laugh. I want to build a life with you, ranch or no ranch." "You love me," Martha whispered. "Of course I love you." "How could I not?" James squeezed her hands. "So yes, I will marry you, and we will run this ranch together as partners the way my parents did. Your name might not be on the deed, but we will both know the truth. This will be your ranch, and I will be honored to help you run it." Martha kissed him there in the barn, with the smell of hay and horses all around them, and it felt like coming home. They were married in September, in a small ceremony at the church in town. Martha wore a simple dress that Sarah had helped her choose, nothing fancy but pretty enough, and James wore his best suit with a new hat. Martha's father gave her away with actual tears in his eyes, and her sisters came with their families, looking shocked that Martha was actually going through with it. The preacher said the words, James slipped a simple gold band on her finger, and then they were married. Husband and wife, partners. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food prepared by half the town. Martha endured the congratulations and the well wishes, smiling until her face hurt, counting the minutes until she and James could slip away to the small cabin her father had given them as a wedding present. It was on the far edge of the ranch property, nestled in a grove of aspens with a view of the mountains that took her breath away. When they finally escaped, the sun was setting and the cabin was lit by lantern light. James carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. "Alone at last," he said, pulling her close. "Thank God," Martha said, and kissed him. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and wonderful, full of whispered endearments and nervous laughter. James was gentle with her, patient, and when it was over, Martha lay in his arms feeling more complete than she ever had in her life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," James said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "My wife, my husband," Martha said, testing out the word. It felt strange and new, but also right. They fell asleep tangled together, and Martha dreamed of wide open spaces and endless skies. Running the ranch as a married couple brought its own challenges. Robert Hayes officially signed the deed over to James as promised, but everyone knew Martha was the real force behind the operation. She managed the books, planned the drives, hired and fired the hands. James handled the day-to-day work, breaking horses and managing the cattle, but he always consulted Martha before making any major decisions. Some of the hands grumbled at first, uncomfortable taking orders from a woman, but Martha proved herself over and over. When a late blizzard hit in November and threatened the herd, it was Martha who organized the rescue operation, riding out into the storm herself to bring the cattle to shelter. When a neighboring rancher tried to claim some of their land, it was Martha who rode into town and faced him down at the land office, deed in hand and fire in her eyes. James supported her through all of it, never once trying to take credit or push her aside. When the hands questioned his decisions, he would say, "Talk to my wife, she is the boss." When townspeople tried to address him instead of Martha in business dealings, he would redirect them firmly. He was secure enough in himself that he didn't need to diminish her to feel important. Their first winter together was hard but happy. The cabin was small but cozy, and they spent long evenings by the fire, talking and planning for the future. James taught Martha to play poker, and she taught him the bookkeeping system she had developed. They argued sometimes, both too stubborn for their own good, but they always made up before bed, neither willing to sleep angry. In February, Martha realized she was pregnant. She told James one night after dinner, nervous about his reaction, but he just picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "A baby," he kept saying, his eyes bright. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Martha asked, still uncertain. "Happy, Martha, I am over the moon." "You are going to be a mother, I am going to be a father, we are going to have a family." He set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Should I have spun you? Is that safe? Do you need to sit down?" Martha laughed at his immediate shift to worry. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. I am going to keep working." "But should you? What about the baby?" "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, James. I'm not going to spend the next 7 months sitting in a chair doing nothing." She softened, seeing his genuine concern. "But I will be careful, I promise." She kept that promise, more or less. Martha worked the ranch through her pregnancy, though she let James take over the more dangerous tasks. She still rode, though she switched to a gentler horse. She still did the books and managed the hands. She just did it all with a growing belly and aching back. Her father fussed over her constantly, and her sisters sent letters full of advice that Martha mostly ignored. James hovered like a nervous hen, which Martha found both annoying and endearing. But through it all, she felt strong and capable and ready for this next chapter. Their son was born in September, a year after their wedding, during a thunderstorm that reminded Martha of the day in the line shack when everything had changed. The birth was long and difficult, with the doctor worried at several points, but Martha was stubborn as always. She brought that baby into the world through sheer force of will, and when the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, she felt a love so fierce it almost scared her. "A boy," James said, his voice choked with emotion. He was sitting beside the bed looking at his son with wonder. "He is perfect. He has your eyes," Martha said, exhausted but happy. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with dark blue eyes that would probably turn the same sky blue as his father's. "What should we name him?" James asked. Martha had thought about this. "What was your father's name?" "Thomas Cordell." "Then let us name him Tommy." She looked down at the baby. "Tommy Cordell, what do you think?" "I think it is perfect," James said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "You are amazing, I am in awe of you." "You say that now," Martha said with a tired smile. "Wait until I have been up all night with a crying baby and am yelling at you." "I will still be in awe," James promised, and Martha believed him. Having a baby changed things, but not as much as Martha had feared. She strapped Tommy to her chest in a sling and kept working, just as women had been doing forever. She nursed him in the barn and the pasture and once, memorably, while sitting on horseback during a cattle drive. The hands got used to seeing their boss with a baby attached, and James split his time between ranch work and helping with Tommy. They were exhausted those first few months, both running on too little sleep and too much coffee. But they were also happy, building this life together, this family. Martha would watch James playing with Tommy, making silly faces to get the baby to laugh and feel her heart swell with love. When Tommy was 6 months old, Martha was out in the corral working with a new horse when she saw riders approaching. There were 5 of them, and something about the way they rode made her immediately tense. She handed the horse off to one of the hands and walked to meet them, making sure to stay near the gate where she could get help if needed. The lead rider was a man in his 40s with a cruel mouth and cold eyes. He looked Martha up and down dismissively before speaking. "I am looking for James Cordell." "He is not here right now," Martha said, which was true. James had ridden into town for supplies. "What is this about?" That is between me and Cordell, the man said. When will he be back? Don't know. Could be hours. Could be tomorrow. Depends. Martha crossed her arms. If you have business with my husband, you can state it to me. I run this ranch. The man laughed, an ugly sound. A woman running a ranch. That is rich. Listen, sweetheart, just tell your husband that Jackson Reeves came by. He will know what it is about. They rode off, and Martha immediately sent one of the hands to town to warn James. She had a bad feeling about those men, and her instincts were rarely wrong. James returned within the hour, riding hard, and his face was grim when Martha told him what had happened. Jackson Reeves, he said, practically spitting the name. I should have known he would find me eventually. Who is he? Martha asked. James sighed and ran a hand through his hair. He is the man who bought my family's land after the fire. Paid bottom dollar for it, took advantage of my grief. I was young and stupid, and I signed the papers without reading them properly. He looked at Martha. There was a clause that said if I ever tried to contest the sale, I would owe him double the purchase price plus interest. I did not find out about it until later, after I tried to get the land back. So, what does he want now? I do not know, but it can't be anything good. Reeves is mean and vindictive. He is the type who holds grudges. James pulled her close. I am sorry, I should have told you about this before. You have nothing to apologize for, Martha said firmly. We will handle this together. But handling Jackson Reeves proved more complicated than either of them had anticipated. He came back the next day, this time when James was there, and he made his intentions clear. He claimed James had stolen a horse from him 5 years ago, right after the fire, and he wanted payment for it plus damages. That is a lie, James said, his voice shaking with anger. I never stole anything from you. Got a witness who says different, Reeves said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Man named Pete Williams. He is willing to testify in court that he saw you take one of my horses. Pete Williams worked for you. He would say anything you told him to say. Maybe so, but the law doesn't care about that. They care about witnesses and testimony. Reeves leaned back in his saddle. Course, we could settle this without involving the law. You pay me $500 and I will forget all about it. That is extortion, Martha said, stepping forward. And we are not paying you a single cent. Reeves looked at her with contempt. This doesn't concern you, woman. This is between me and Cordell. My husband's business is my business, Martha said coldly, and you need to leave our land now, or what, you will throw me off, Reeves laughed. I am real scared of a little girl playing rancher. Martha was about to respond when Tommy started crying in the house behind them. Reeves's eyes sharpened, and something predatory entered his expression. Got a kid, do you? That is sweet. Be a shame if something happened to your nice little family here. He tipped his hat mockingly. Think about my offer, Cordell. $500 or I take you to court, and if I take you to court, I will make sure everyone knows you are a horse thief. Won't be so easy to run a ranch with that kind of reputation. He rode off, and Martha felt cold dread settle in her stomach. This was worse than she thought. Men like Reeves didn't make idle threats. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Martha and James sat at their small kitchen table and talked about their options. They didn't have $500 in cash, not without selling off part of the herd, and they were already stretched thin from the winter losses. But fighting Reeves in court would cost money too, plus there was no guarantee they would win, not with a paid witness ready to lie. We could talk to the sheriff, Martha suggested. Tell him about the extortion. Sheriff is old friends with Reeves, James said bitterly. He won't do anything. Then we get a lawyer, fight this proper. With what money, Martha? We barely have enough to get through the year as it is. They went round and round, but no solution presented itself. They went to bed that night with the problem still unsolved, lying awake in the darkness, both worried about what would come next. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days later, Martha's father rode up to their cabin and dismounted with some difficulty, his age showing in the stiffness of his movements. Heard you have been having trouble with Jackson Reeves, Robert Hayes said without preamble. Word travels fast, Martha said, inviting him inside. It does in a small territory. Her father sat down at the table, accepting the coffee Martha poured for him. I knew his father back before Reeves took over, mean son of a gun, and the son is worse. But I also know something about Jackson Reeves that might help you. He told them a story about a land deal gone wrong, about property Reeves had acquired through forgery and intimidation. There were people who knew about it, people who could testify, but they were afraid of Reeves and his men. However, if someone were to stand up to him, to show that he could be challenged, others might find their courage too. So you are saying we should fight him, James said. I am saying you should call his bluff. He is counting on you being too scared or too poor to fight back. Show him you are not afraid and he might back down, and if he doesn't, well, you won't be fighting alone. Robert Hayes looked at his daughter with pride. You have friends in this territory, Martha, people who respect what you have built here. Ask for help, and you might be surprised at what you get. It took Martha a moment to realize what her father was offering. He would help them, financially and otherwise, to fight Reeves. After all the years of tension between them, all the arguments about what she should be, he was finally showing her that he accepted who she was, that he was proud of her. Thank you, Pa, Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. Nothing to thank me for. You are my daughter and this is my grandson. No one threatens my family. He stood up, ready to leave. Talk to Ben Lawson in town. He is a good lawyer and he owes me a favor. I will cover his fees. After her father left, Martha and James looked at each other with new hope. They spent the next week gathering information, talking to people who had been wronged by Reeves, building a case. Ben Lawson was indeed a good lawyer, sharp as a tack and not afraid of a fight. He filed papers disputing Reeves's claim and countersued for attempted extortion. Reeves was furious. He came back to the ranch with his men, clearly intending to intimidate them, but this time Martha was ready. She had every hand on the ranch armed and standing by, and her father had sent over some of his men as well. Reeves took one look at the show of force and turned his horse around without saying a word. The case went to court in March, and it was ugly. Reeves's lawyer tried every trick in the book, and Pete Williams did indeed testify that he saw James steal a horse. But Ben Lawson was brilliant, poking holes in Williams's story until even the judge looked skeptical. Then he brought forward 3 other witnesses who testified about Reeves's own illegal dealings, painting a picture of a man who made a habit of using the law to bully people. The judge ruled in their favor, dismissing Reeves's claim and ordering him to pay court costs. It was not a complete victory since Reeves faced no real punishment for his attempted extortion, but it was enough. Reeves left the territory shortly after, moving on to easier targets, and Martha and James could finally breathe easy. We did it, James said that night, holding Martha close. Tommy was asleep in his cradle and the cabin was quiet and peaceful. We actually did it. We had help, Martha said. But yes, we did. Your father really came through, he did, Martha smiled. I think he is finally starting to understand that I am never going to be the daughter he thought he wanted, that I am the daughter he needed. You are amazing, James said, kissing her temple. Have I told you that lately? Not in the past hour, Martha teased. Better remedy that. You are amazing, brilliant, fierce, beautiful, the best mother and wife and rancher I could ever ask for. He kissed her properly. How is that? It is a start, Martha said, pulling him toward the bedroom. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under Martha's management, growing from a medium-sized operation to one of the most successful in the territory. She earned a reputation as a sharp businesswoman and a fair boss, and other ranchers started seeking her advice. James continued to be her partner in every sense, working beside her, supporting her decisions and helping to raise Tommy. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. By the time he was 4, he was following Martha around everywhere, begging her to teach him to rope. She started him on a small practice rope, just like her father had done for her, and felt a surge of pride when he managed to catch a fence post on his 5th try. "That is my boy," she said, ruffling his dark hair. "You are a natural." "Like you, Mama," Tommy said, beaming up at her. Martha was pregnant again when Tommy turned 5, and this time she knew what to expect. The pregnancy was easier than the first, maybe because she was less anxious, and when her daughter was born in the spring of 1892, it was a shorter labor with fewer complications. They named her Rose after James's mother, and she was the opposite of Tommy in every way. Where he had been a fussy baby, she was calm. Where he was energetic and loud, she was quiet and thoughtful. But she had Martha's stubborn streak, evident from the moment she learned to crawl and immediately headed for places she wasn't supposed to go. "We are in trouble with this one," James said, watching 6-month-old Rose pull herself up on the furniture for the 10th time that day. "We were always going to be in trouble," Martha said, scooping up her daughter. "She is our daughter. Trouble is in her blood. With 2 children and a growing ranch, life was busy." Martha rarely had a moment to herself, juggling the responsibilities of mother and rancher and wife. But she wouldn't have changed it for anything. This life, messy and chaotic as it was exactly what she had always wanted, even if she hadn't known it. Her sisters came to visit sometimes, bringing their own children, and they marveled at how Martha managed everything. "I don't know how you do it," Sarah said one afternoon, watching Martha nurse Rose while simultaneously going over the books with one of the hands. "I am exhausted just running my household." "You get used to it," Martha said. "Besides, I have help." And she did. James was an involved father, taking the children with him when he worked so Martha could focus on the business side of things. Her father, now in his 70s, still came by regularly to see his grandchildren and offer advice. The ranch hands had long since stopped seeing Martha as unusual and just accepted that their boss was a woman who could outrope and outride most of them. When Tommy was 7 and Rose was 2, Colorado achieved statehood, and the territory became an official part of the United States. There was a big celebration in town, with speeches and dancing and fireworks. Martha attended with her family, wearing one of the few nice dresses she owned, and stood with James as the new state flag was raised. "Things are changing," James said, holding Rose on his hip while Tommy stood between them. "They are," Martha agreed, "but some things stay the same." She was thinking about the land, about the ranch that had been her life for as long as she could remember. States and territories might change, laws might shift, but the land remained constant. The mountains still rose in the distance, the cattle still needed tending, and the work still had to be done. That was something she could count on. As the years passed, Martha watched her children grow and the ranch continue to thrive. Tommy developed into a skilled horseman and an even better roper than his mother, which Martha pretended to be annoyed about but was secretly thrilled by. Rose surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for numbers and started helping with the books when she was just 8 years old. "She has your head for business," James told Martha one evening. "And your patience," Martha replied. "I never had the temperament for bookwork. I just did it because it needed doing." They were sitting on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed, but more likely getting into some kind of mischief. It was a moment of peace in their busy lives, and Martha treasured it. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked suddenly. "Marrying me, taking on all of this?" Martha looked at him, surprised. "What brought that on?" "I was just thinking about that day in the lined shack when I asked to court you. We barely knew each other. You could have said no, could have married someone else or not married at all. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had made different choices?" "Never," Martha said firmly. She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "James, you gave me everything I didn't even know I wanted. A partner, a family, someone who sees me and loves me for exactly who I am." "How could I regret that? I love you," James said, pulling her close. "I have loved you since the day I saw you rope that stallion, all fierce and confident and not caring what anyone thought." "I love you too," Martha said, resting her head on his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible." They sat there as the stars came out, comfortable in their silence, and Martha thought about how lucky she was. Not just lucky in love, but lucky in life. She had a home she loved, work that mattered, children who made her proud, and a husband who was her equal in every way that counted. When Martha was 35, her father died peacefully in his sleep. It was not unexpected since he had been slowing down for years, but it still hit Martha hard. Robert Hayes had been a complicated man, stubborn and old-fashioned in many ways, but in the end, he had chosen to see his daughter for who she really was. That meant everything to Martha. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone marker that read, Robert Hayes, 1822 to 1898. He loved this land. Half the state seemed to turn out for the funeral, all the people whose lives he had touched over his long years in Colorado. Martha stood between James and her sisters, holding Rose's hand while Tommy stood tall and solemn at her other side, trying to be strong for his mother. After the funeral, there was the matter of the will. Robert Hayes had left his remaining property to his children equally, with specific instructions that Martha's portion should be in her name only, not her husband's. It was a final gift, a recognition that the woman who had actually run the ranch for the past decade deserved to legally own it. He must have spent years working with lawyers to figure out how to do that, Sarah said, reading through the documents, making sure it was ironclad so no one could contest it. He did, Martha said, tears in her eyes. He told me about it last year, wanted to make sure I understood. Said it was the least he could do after all the years he spent trying to make me into something I was not. With her father gone and her portion of his land added to what she and James had built, Martha found herself one of the largest landholders in the region. It was a responsibility she took seriously, using her position to help other ranchers, especially the few other women who were trying to make it in a male-dominated industry. She became known as someone who would give good advice and a fair hearing, and her ranch became a stopping point for women traveling through the region who needed help or a safe place to stay. Martha remembered what it felt like to be different, to not fit the mold society expected, and she made sure to extend a hand to others who felt the same way. Tommy was 15 when he started asking to take on more responsibility at the ranch. He was tall like his father, with the same blue eyes and easy smile, but he had Martha's determination and drive. James started training him in earnest, teaching him everything about managing cattle and horses and men. "He is a good kid," James said one night, pride evident in his voice. "Smart and hard-working, he will do well." "He will," Martha agreed. "Though I worry about him sometimes. He is so serious, like he feels he has to prove something." "He is the son of the most respected rancher in the state," James said. "That is a lot to live up to." "I never wanted him to feel pressured." "He doesn't feel pressured, he feels inspired. There is a difference." James kissed her forehead. "You have built something amazing here, Martha. Our children see that. They want to be part of it." Rose, at 12, announced that she wanted to go to school in Denver. She had learned everything she could from the local schoolteacher and was hungry for more education. Martha understood that hunger, even though she had never cared much for formal schooling herself. "Are you sure?" She asked her daughter. "Denver is far away and you would have to board with a family there." "I am sure, Mama," Rose said, her jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded Martha of herself. "I want to learn about business and law. I want to be able to help run the ranch properly, not just keep the books." Martha and James discussed it at length and finally agreed. They found a good family in Denver who would take Rose in, and they enrolled her in the best school they could afford. Letting her daughter go was one of the hardest things Martha had ever done, but she knew it was the right choice. Rose had her own path to follow, just like Martha had. The ranch felt emptier without Rose's quiet presence, but Martha stayed busy. She was serving on the local school board now, pushing for better education for all the children in the area. She was also involved in the movement for women's suffrage, which was gaining momentum across the country. Colorado had granted women the right to vote in 1893, and Martha took that responsibility seriously, voting in every election and encouraging other women to do the same. "You have become quite the activist," James teased one evening, finding her writing letters to state legislators about education funding. "Someone has to," Martha said, not looking up from her writing. "Things do not change unless people make them change." "I am proud of you," James said, coming to stand behind her chair and massage her shoulders. "You have done so much, accomplished so much. You should be proud too." Martha set down her pen and leaned back into his touch. They were both older now, lines on their faces and gray in their hair, but James still made her heart flutter the way he had when they were young. Time had not diminished what they had. If anything, it had deepened it, adding layers of shared experience and mutual respect to the foundation of love. "I am proud," she said. "Proud of what we have built together. I could not have done any of this without you." "Yes, you could have," James said, "but I am glad you didn't have to." When the new century dawned in 1900, Martha was 37 years old and feeling every one of those years. Her body ached from decades of hard work, and she moved a little slower than she used to. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and her love for the land had not diminished one bit. They held a party at the ranch to celebrate the new century, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. Rose came home from Denver, now a poised young woman of 14 with dreams of becoming a lawyer. Tommy, 17 and practically running the ranch alongside his parents, spent the evening dancing with a local girl named Emma who clearly had her cap set for him. "He is going to get married soon," James said, watching his son with fond exasperation. "Mark my words." "Not too soon, I hope," Martha said. "He is still so young. He is the same age I was when I met you. Exactly, too young." James laughed and pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor that had been set up in the barn. "Come on, Mrs. Cordell, dance with your husband." "I can't dance," Martha protested, but she went anyway. "You have been saying that for 15 years, and yet here you are, dancing with me every time I ask." James spun her clumsily, and they both laughed when she stepped on his foot. "See, terrible at it." "I don't care," James said, pulling her close. "Dance with me anyway." They swayed together to the music from the fiddle band, surrounded by friends and family, ushering in a new century together. Martha rested her head on James's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, thinking about all the years behind them and all the years still to come. Tommy did indeed marry Emma 2 years later, in the spring of 1902. It was a beautiful ceremony, with Emma looking radiant in white lace and Tommy looking proud and happy and terrified all at once. They moved into a house on the ranch property, and Emma proved to be a hard worker and a good match for Tommy's serious nature. Within a year, Martha was a grandmother. Tommy and Emma's first child, a boy they named Robert after Martha's father, was born healthy and strong. Holding her grandson for the first time, Martha felt the circle of life complete itself. She was no longer just the daughter and the wife and the mother. She was the grandmother, the matriarch, the foundation upon which this family was built. "He is beautiful," she whispered, looking down at the baby's tiny face. "He has your eyes," Emma said from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "Poor thing," Martha joked, but she was delighted. Rose graduated from her school in Denver at the top of her class and announced her intention to study law. It was almost unheard of for a woman, but Rose had inherited her mother's determination and would not be swayed. She apprenticed with a lawyer in Denver, learning everything she could with the goal of one day opening her own practice. "My daughter, the lawyer," Martha said, shaking her head in wonder. "I can barely believe it." "Why not?" Rose asked when she came home for a visit. "You run one of the most successful ranches in Colorado. If you can do that, why can't I practice law?" "I am not saying you can't. I am just amazed at how much the world has changed. When I was your age, a woman rancher was scandalous enough. A woman lawyer was unthinkable. The world keeps changing, Mama, and women like you made that possible. You showed everyone that women could do anything if they were allowed to try." Rose hugged her mother tightly. I am just following your example." Martha blinked back tears, overwhelmed with pride and love for this fierce, intelligent daughter of hers. As Martha entered her 40s, she started thinking about the future of the ranch. Tommy was more than capable of running it, and with Emma by his side and a growing family to support, it made sense to start transitioning more control to him. But it was hard to let go, even knowing it was the right thing to do. "I feel like I am giving up a piece of myself," she confessed to James one night. "You are not giving up anything," James said. "You are passing it on. There is a difference. The ranch will still be here, still be in the family, you will still be involved. You are just sharing the burden." "I never saw it as a burden, I know. But maybe it is time to let yourself rest a little, enjoy life without quite so much responsibility." James took her hand. "We have worked hard our whole lives, Martha. Maybe we deserve to take it a little easier now." She knew he was right, but it still took her another year to actually make the change. On her 45th birthday, she officially made Tommy the primary manager of the ranch, though she retained ownership and continued to be involved in major decisions. It was strange at first, having more free time, not being the one everyone came to with every problem. But James was right. It was also liberating. For the first time in her life, Martha had time to pursue things just because she wanted to, not because they were necessary. She started spending more time with the suffrage movement, traveling to meetings and giving speeches about her experiences as a woman in business. She wrote articles for newspapers about ranching and land management, sharing her knowledge with a wider audience. And she spent time with James, just the two of them, rediscovering the relationship that had started all those years ago in a lined shack during a thunderstorm. They took rides through the mountains, just for the pleasure of it. They had long conversations by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. They made love with the comfort of long familiarity, but also with the passion that had never quite faded. "I love you more now than I did when we married," James told her one night, his hand tracing patterns on her back. "That is impossible," Martha said. "You were completely besotted with me from the start." "True. But it is a different kind of love now, deeper, richer, built on years of shared life." He kissed her softly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Martha Cordell." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Martha whispered back. "My cowboy who saw past what I could not do and loved me for what I could." They fell asleep tangled together, the way they had for over 20 years, and Martha dreamed of endless skies and the whistle of a rope through the air. Tommy and Emma went on to have 3 more children, giving Martha and James 4 grandchildren to spoil and love. Rose did become a lawyer, opening a practice in Denver that specialized in property law and women's rights. She never married, choosing instead to focus on her career, and Martha supported that choice completely. When Martha was 50, she and James took a trip back to Wyoming, to the place where James had grown up. The land his family had owned was now owned by someone else, but they were friendly folks who let Martha and James walk the property. James showed her where the house had stood before the fire, where the barn had been, where he learned to ride and rope. "This is where I became who I am," he said, standing on a hill overlooking the valley. "But it is not home anymore. Home is wherever you are." Martha leaned into him, feeling the Montana wind on her face. "Home is our ranch, our family, the life we built together." Exactly. They returned to Colorado renewed, ready for whatever came next. And what came next were more years of quiet happiness, of watching grandchildren grow, of seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Tommy's management, of being together. Martha was 55 when James got sick. It started as a cough that would not go away, and by winter it had turned into something more serious. The doctors said it was pneumonia, that James needed rest and care. Martha nursed him through it, barely sleeping, willing him to get better through sheer force of will. He did recover, but slowly, and he was never quite as strong afterward. It scared Martha, the realization that they were not invincible, that time was catching up with them. But it also made her grateful for every day they had together. "We have had a good life," James said one afternoon, sitting on the porch wrapped in blankets even though it was summer. He was still recovering, still weak, but the worst had passed. "We are not done yet," Martha said firmly. "You are going to get better, and we are going to have many more years together." "I hope so," James said. "But if we don't, if something happens, I need you to know that I have no regrets. You gave me everything, Martha. A home, a family, a partnership, love. What more could a man ask for?" "Stop talking like you are dying," Martha said, her voice sharp to hide her fear. "You are going to be fine." And he was, mostly. James regained much of his strength over the following months, though he was never quite back to his old self. He left more of the physical work to the younger men, and spent more time with the grandchildren, teaching them to rope and ride the way he had taught Tommy and Rose. Martha watched him with one of her grandchildren one afternoon, patiently showing 4-year-old Robert how to hold a rope, and felt her heart swell. This man, this wonderful man who had seen her when no one else did, who had loved her unconditionally for over 30 years, who had been her partner in every sense of the word. She could not imagine her life without him. That night she told him so. "I can't imagine life without you," she said, lying in bed with her head on his chest. "You won't have to, not for a long time," James said, running his fingers through her hair, which was now more gray than brown. "I plan to be around to annoy you for many more years." "Good," Martha said. "Because I have gotten used to you. Just used to me. All right, more than used to. I love you desperately and completely, and I always will." "That is better," James said, and kissed the top of her head. The years continued to pass, bringing changes but also constants. Tommy and Emma's children grew, and the oldest started helping on the ranch. Rose's law practice flourished, and she became known as one of the best property lawyers in the state. The ranch continued to prosper, adapting to new techniques and technologies while maintaining the core values Martha had instilled. When Martha turned 60, her family threw her a surprise party. It seemed like half the state showed up, all these people whose lives she had touched over the years. Ranchers she had helped, women she had mentored, children she had taught to rope, families she had employed. Standing in the midst of it all, with James by her side and her children and grandchildren surrounding her, Martha felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "You did good, Mama," Tommy said, hugging her tight. "You built something amazing." "We built something amazing," Martha corrected, gesturing to include James and her children. "I did not do this alone, but you started it," Rose said. "You had the vision and the courage to be yourself, even when the world told you that you should not. That is worth celebrating." The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and endless stories about Martha's exploits over the years. Some of the stories were true, some were exaggerated, but all of them were told with love and respect. When everyone finally went home and it was just Martha and James sitting on the porch watching the stars, Martha felt content in a way she never had before. "Thank you," she said to James. "For what? For everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for being my partner, for giving me this life." She took his hand. "For that day in the corral when you smiled at me and said, 'But you can rope,' you have no idea how much those words meant to me." "I think I do," James said. "Because you have given me just as much. You made me believe in love again after I thought I had lost everything. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You made me better than I would have been without you." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the stars wheel overhead. They were old now, their bodies marked by years of hard work and life, but their love was as strong as it had ever been. Stronger even, for being tested and proven over decades. Martha was 63 when James died. It was quick, a heart attack that took him in his sleep. One moment he was there, breathing peacefully beside her, and the next he was gone. The doctor said he would not have felt any pain, that it was a good way to go, but Martha could not find any comfort in those words. The man she had loved for nearly 40 years was gone, and the world felt impossibly empty without him. The funeral was huge, with people coming from across the state to pay their respects. James had been well loved, known as a good man and a fair boss and a devoted husband and father. The tributes people gave were beautiful, talking about his kindness and his skill and his integrity. But none of them captured the man Martha had known, the private James who made her laugh and held her when she cried and loved her with his whole heart. She stood at his grave on the same hill where her father was buried and felt like a piece of her had been torn away. How was she supposed to go on without him? How was she supposed to wake up each morning and not see his face, not hear his voice, not feel his arms around her? "Mama," Rose said softly, taking her hand. "We need to go." Martha let herself be led away, numb with grief. The weeks that followed were the hardest of her life. She moved through each day mechanically, doing what needed to be done but feeling none of it. The ranch kept running because Tommy was there to manage it, but Martha could not bring herself to care. What was the point of any of it without James? Slowly, painfully, she found her way back to living. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, making sure she ate and slept and got out of bed each day. They told her stories about James, keeping his memory alive. They reminded her that she still had so much to live for, so many people who loved her and needed her. "Pa would not want you to give up," Tommy said one afternoon, finding his mother sitting alone in the cabin she had shared with James. "He would want you to keep going, keep fighting." "I know," Martha said, her voice rough from crying, "but it is so hard." "I know it is. But you are the strongest person I have ever known. If anyone can get through this, it is you." Martha looked at her son, this man who looked so much like his father, and felt a flicker of her old determination. She had survived losing her mother as a child. She had survived being different in a world that wanted her to conform. She had survived threats and legal battles and the hardships of ranch life. She could survive this too. She had to, for her family, for the legacy she and James had built together. It took time, but Martha slowly came back to herself. She started spending more time with her grandchildren, teaching them about ranching and life. She resumed her involvement with the suffrage movement and her other causes. She began to smile again, to laugh again, though there was always a shadow of sadness in her eyes. She missed James every single day. She missed his voice and his touch and his presence. She missed their conversations and their shared glances and the comfortable silence they had perfected over years of marriage. But she also felt him with her in other ways, in the wind on her face when she rode, in the sunset over the mountains, in the sound of her grandchildren's laughter. "I am still here," she would whisper sometimes, talking to him as if he could hear. "Still doing what we started, still loving you, always loving you." Martha lived another 15 years after James died, long enough to see women gain the right to vote nationwide, long enough to see Rose argue cases before the state Supreme Court, long enough to see Tommy's oldest son take over more responsibilities on the ranch. She lived long enough to become a legend in her own right, the woman who had defied expectations and built an empire, who had shown that strength came in many forms. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, in the cabin she had shared with James for so many years. When they buried her on the hill beside her husband, it seemed like the entire state mourned. The newspapers ran obituaries celebrating her life and accomplishments. Politicians gave speeches about her contributions to Colorado. But the truest tribute came from her family, who stood around her grave and told stories about the woman she had been. "She taught me that being different was not something to be ashamed of," Rose said, her voice strong despite her tears. "She showed me that women could do anything if we had the courage to try. She taught me what real partnership looks like," Tommy said. "The way she and Pa worked together, respected each other, loved each other. That is what I have tried to build with Emma." "She taught me to rope," said Robert, Tommy's oldest son, now a young man running the ranch alongside his father. "But more than that, she taught me to see people for who they really are, not who the world says they should be." They laid her to rest beside James, with a simple stone that read, "Martha Hayes Cordell, 1863 to 1941, she could rope." And beneath that, barely visible in the gathering dusk, someone had carved one more line, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, pioneer. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story Martha had started. Rose's law firm became one of the most prestigious in the state, known for taking on cases that mattered. The cabin where Martha and James had lived became a historical landmark, preserved as a testament to the woman who had lived there and the love story that had unfolded within its walls. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the aspens and the sun set over the mountains, people said you could still feel their presence. Martha with her rope and her determination, James with his patient smile and kind eyes. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love, who had proven that the best partnerships were between equals. Their story became the stuff of legend, passed down through the family and beyond. The woman who could not dance or sew or do anything ladies were supposed to do, but who could rope. And the cowboy who saw past what she could not do and loved her for what she could. Together, they had built something that lasted long after they were gone, a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love and partnership and the courage to be true to yourself. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the size of the ranch or the money in the bank or the accolades from society. What mattered was that they had loved each other deeply and truly, that they had built a family together, that they had faced every challenge side by side. What mattered was that Martha had been allowed to be herself, and James had loved her for it. Their great-great-grandchildren would sometimes ride up to that hill where Martha and James were buried, standing together even in death, and they would tell the story. The story of the woman who defied convention, the cowboy who saw her worth, and the love that had grown between them. It was a story about being seen and valued, about partnership and respect, about finding someone who loved you not despite your differences but because of them. And always the story ended the same way, with Martha's words echoing across the generations. "I can't dance or sew or do anything ladies do." And James's response, simple and perfect, "But you can rope." Those 4 words had changed everything. They had opened a door to a life Martha had never imagined possible, a life full of love and work and family and purpose. They had been the beginning of a story that would be told and retold, inspiring others to be brave enough to be themselves, to find someone who saw them truly, to build something that would last. The ranch still stood, sprawling across the Colorado landscape, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together. The mountains still rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging. And somewhere in the wind that whistled through the valleys and over the plains, you could almost hear the sound of a rope being thrown, catching its target perfectly, the way Martha Hayes Cordell had done countless times in her remarkable life. Her story was not just about ranching or the Old West or defying gender expectations, though it was all of those things. At its heart, it was a love story. A story about 2 people who found each other and recognized something true and real, who built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection, who loved each other through all the challenges and joys that life brought them. It was a story that proved that the greatest adventures were not always the ones that took you far from home, but the ones that happened right where you were, with the person standing beside you. That the greatest accomplishments were not always the most celebrated, but the quiet, daily choices to love and support and believe in someone else. That the greatest legacy was not always measured in land or money or fame, but in the lives you touched and the love you left behind. Martha and James had understood that. They had lived it every single day of their life together, and in the end, that was everything. They had been partners, lovers, friends, and soulmates. They had built something beautiful together, something that lasted long after they were gone. They had loved each other completely for exactly who they were, and that love had transformed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. As the sun set over the Colorado ranch that bore their name, as the cattle grazed peacefully in the valleys and the horses ran free in the pastures, as the family they had created gathered together to share meals and stories and laughter. The legacy of Martha and James lived on. Not just in the land or the business, but in the values they had instilled, the example they had set, the love they had shared. But you can rope. 4 simple words spoken by a cowboy to a woman who felt like she did not belong anywhere. 4 words that had changed the course of 2 lives, that had started a love story for the ages, that had created a legacy that would endure for generations. 4 words that meant, I see you. I value you. I love you for exactly who you are, and in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?